So I'm going to get started. Welcome to the 51st episode of our monthly virtual seminar series. Again, we started these webinars as a place to ask the clumsy questions and to practice bravery and humility and have conversations. And we've been so grateful for the community that you have built around them. If this is your first roundtable, all you need to know is that they are designed for contribution, not consumption. And as a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to make some introductory remarks, allowing 30 minutes for discussion. Let me start, as we always do, by understanding why this topic at this time by these speakers. The Chesapeake Bay Partnership is continuing the efforts of creating the vision for beyond 2025, formulating a path to navigate the uncertainty and challenges of restoration in a dynamic future. The problem is complex because of the multiple objectives for that restoration. What exactly are we restoring and for whom? By all measures and definitions of a partnership approach, that calls for a participatory process. Participatory processes refers to stakeholders' involvement in the planning or decision-making process. And I think that our first speaker will kind of give us a fuller definition. It comes with many key benefits, including informed decision-making, increased legitimacy and trust, enhanced stewardship and accountability, conflict resolution, social learning and capacity building, and usually improved outcomes. In spite of these benefits, public engagement can take many forms and seems to be one of those concepts that no one is against, but reserves the right to define it for themselves. So does it mean 15 minutes at the end of a meeting for public comments? Is it a town hall format? Does it involve consensus building? I think if we're going to use it effectively, we need some language for all of those forms so that we can use the process effectively. And our speakers are here to do just that. Rachel Felver is a beloved figure for many of us. She's the Director of Communications for the Chesapeake Bay Program. She's tasked with everything from overseeing the strategic communication needs of the watershed agreement to being the partnership's main media contact, to herding 6 governors and associated bigwigs to inspire us at the annual Executive Council meeting. From that experience, she has seen and conducted many versions of public participation and is the perfect person to give us some language and frameworks. On her LinkedIn page, she has been called a queen, the exemplar of grace under pressure, and a legendary badass, and I can vouch that she is all of those things and more. Rob Beach is a similar communications badass, having spent over 20 years in marketing everything from racing sailboat parts to the power of engagement in bay restoration via his position at Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is the largest independent conservation organization dedicated solely to saving the bay. And to give you a feeling for the size of the platform that Rob manages, CBF has over 200,000 members and supporters and approximately 250 staff members, and an education program that has now served more than 1.5 million. It is said that the best trait for a marketer is empathy, which is the ability to understand first and act second. And I think Rob is the perfect example of that. And he has conducted an enormous exercise in understanding that he's going to talk about. So with no further ado, I will turn the platform over to Rachel. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Denise. Let me get my slides. Right. Hopefully you all can see that in the right, mode. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here today to discuss with you the importance of involving the public in the decisions that are related to your work. Besides giving you my own opinion today, I wanted to share with you some of the processes and theories that are in place that guide public participatory processes. And I really want to thank the Chesapeake Research Consortium for providing the time to share this important topic. So going back quickly, sorry, I'm hitting all the buttons here. The photo that is taken here, just to put some context to this conversation, was taken during the negotiations for what would become the very first Chesapeake Bay Agreement that was signed back in 1983. So again, hello, my name is Rachel. I am privileged to serve the Chesapeake Bay program as their communications director, and my home organization is the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. So what is the public participation process? And I am going to screw up saying this throughout the whole webinar because it is just a tongue twister, so bear with me. I don't have a fancy technical answer for you. It is simply any process that directly engages the public in decision making and considers their input in making that decision. You will see this defined in hundreds of different ways, but ultimately it is all going to come back to this sentence. So if this is a new thought process for you, I want to share a few quick notes. It is not one single decision, but an actual process. It has become a much studied theory and practice around the world. And I have shared some of my favorite resources with Denise to give to you after this, including one I have right here, which is called Social Science Theory for Environmental Sustainability. There's even an International Association for Public Participation, and I'm going to come back to that in a few slides. And lastly, a rule of thumb that I think is incredibly important to remember: public participation, more public participation, is not necessarily better. What you need is to target those stakeholders that are integral to making the decisions to your work. But it just goes beyond targeting those audiences. You need to understand them. What are their values? What are their interests? You cannot assume to simply change the well-being of others if you do not understand what their lived experiences are. So what are some benefits of public participation? It allows for a broad range of ideas and strategies. It provides more facts, values, and perspectives to consider that you may not have thought about at all. It helps build trust between you and your stakeholders. Because you're involving them early and often, which as a communications professional, I urge you to always do, you're telling them that you value their thoughts and you're providing them with the confidence that your work is legitimate and you care about their concerns. It builds capacity not only in themselves, but in their community. If they are involved from the start, there is more ownership on their part to see your work through and continue to championship. And on their part, it builds more cohesion and trust between the stakeholders themselves. In the long run, it can also save you time and money. You've invested upfront, so the chances of having to spend more time on resolving conflict, controversial decisions, or redoing part of the work is minimal. But some of these benefits can also be deterrents. Working with the public can lead to extensive negotiations or unpopular compromises. And probably the biggest disadvantage of all is that it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this in a thoughtful manner. You need to integrate yourself with your stakeholders and earn the trust of the community. It will often require more staffing resources, the ability to travel, to network, and that can lead to higher expenses. My personal opinion, though, is that it is worth the time and it is worth the effort. Keep this in mind. You will see measurable impacts of cost and time savings if done right. But you're also going to have numerous immeasurable impacts of trust building, project satisfaction, and an improved quality of life for your stakeholders. There are many different levels in how to involve the public in your work. The first I'll talk about is procedural. We call this the checking the box exercise. You've been told to engage with the public, so you're going to take actions to assume they are informed. The next is substantive. You wish to engage with the public because they have knowledge, they have facts, they have other information that is useful to you and can help better inform your work. This is the level of involvement where most of us desire to be. Then there's instrumental. This is where the public's involvement is necessary to the success of your work. An example of this may be mandated public forums as part of a legal process and is often used to avoid high levels of conflict or resistance. And finally, there's normative involvement. Involving the public is inherently beneficial to your work, and you have a moral obligation to build in the desires and values of your stakeholders into your decision-making process. This level of involvement goes beyond the substantive, and a good example would be a citizen advisory board. But I cannot stress enough that you should not choose a level of involvement if you do not intend to follow through with it. This is the fastest way to lose trust with your stakeholders. So let me go back quickly to that International Association for Public Participation. This graphic may look familiar to some of you, as it is called the spectrum of public participation. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail because we just don't have the time today, but I want to let you know that many organizations have altered this to fit their best intentions and their purposes, but this is basically the original right here. The association designed it basically so it would help you select the level of participation that you need for your work and help define the public's role in the process. And despite our best intentions, most of us fall here under inform or consult, even though we really want to be here under collaborate. So based on that spectrum of public participation, these are some types of communications and outreach tools that you can use depending on your goal. If you wish to just inform the public, then this is where you want to create a fact sheet or a newsletter. If you want to get to more to the consulting, this is where you're going to utilize a good survey or create a focus group. And after that, you start to move into more things like design charrettes, workshops, your advisory committees, and then ultimately for empowering is where you want to get to more balloting and delegated decisions. So lastly, before I end, I wanted to make sure to share the association's core values for public participation, because these are really good to keep in mind. I'm just going to read them through once verbatim in case folks can't see the screen. Public participation is based on the belief that those who are affected by the decision have the right to be involved in the decision-making process. Public participation includes the promise that the public's contribution will influence the decision. Public participation promotes sustainable decisions by recognizing and communicating the needs and interests of all participants, including decision makers. Public participation seeks out and facilitates the involvement of those potentially affected by or interested in a decision. Public participation seeks input from participants in designing how they participate. Public participation provides participants with the information they need to participate in a meaningful way. And public participation communicates to participants how their input affected the decision. So I'll stop there with some background, and I will turn this over to my colleague, Rob, who is going to show you how this has been put into practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Rob, that's a wonderful platform for you to start.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks for having me, and thanks, Rachel, for that part of it. Good afternoon, everyone, and special shout out to my CBF peeps I see on here. Many of these folks could speak more about public participation and encouraging behavioral change than I could, but I thought maybe that today I could share a little bit of an example of some of CBF's work anyway on what I now know, thanks to Rachel, is probably more part of the consultative part of public participation. But recently, in October and November of last year, we conducted some public opinion research around the expectations or perceptions of base saving and the expectations of the public in terms of what's coming next, and in particular in the some of it around the expectations around the next Bay Agreement. And so I thought you all might like to see a snapshot of what we found. There's a lot of data here, and I've got too many slides, and I'll try to go as quickly as possible. But if anybody has further questions about it afterwards or wants to see more of the data, let me know. I'm on a world tour right now trying to share it with as many people as possible. So let me share my screen and get going. Here we go. You all should see my PowerPoint now. I will also say that I broke a lot of rules in communications rules in terms of what is on slides, and there's far too much information, so I beg your forgiveness. But basically, I'm trying to advance this, and it's not going. Here we go. As I mentioned, back in October, November of 2024, we conducted some public opinion research. This was working with Ipsos, which is the, I think, third largest public opinion research and polling firm in the world. We did this in watershed states, polling about 2,000 people. It was 600 from Washington, or 600 from Pennsylvania, 600 from Virginia, 600 from Maryland, 200 from the District of Columbia. We also included and polled our CBF members, so we can kind of look at expectations of our members against general public. And then, of course, with any public opinion research, you can look at crosstabs any number of different ways. So there's a ton of data here, and I'm just going to share with you a little bit about it. But first, one of the things we wanted to do was see if we can figure out anything interesting that might be of interest to the media. We will be releasing some of this information publicly in a couple weeks, and the media love things like the public discourse around what the Bay region's favorite crab seasoning is. So here's a pop quiz for you. And if you want to plop in the chat what you think the response was, I'll reveal it in a moment after I see some response in there. A lot of really smart people. Old Bay. J.O., there you go. Old Bay. This is hotly contested in various Reddit subreddits and whatnot. So I don't think anybody would be surprised to learn that it was Old Bay. It was 79% Old Bay, 5% JO. When you drill down in the data, it is slightly higher in Maryland for JO, but I think interestingly also 13% of people said they don't eat crabs. So first of all, who are these so-called general public of the watershed? I think one of the questions I saw that was submitted in advance was, how do you actually talk to the general public? And I hate the word general public because it's a terrible thing to think about in terms of being a communications expert. There are no general public. There's audiences within the public, and if we're designing communications devices or encouraging public engagement, we should never think about everybody. We should think about who our target audiences are or key segments. So of the respondents, I think this is kind of interesting. These were all watershed residents that responded to this, at least by county. Of course, watershed lines bifurcate some counties in some places, but by and large, they're watershed residents. And I think interestingly, if you look there in Maryland, somewhat 60% of them either think they live outside the watershed or they don't know. I think this is kind of interesting. It's sort of shocking in a way, but not all that surprising. A couple of takeaways that I have for this anyways, if you're talking about inclusivity and trying to communicate in an inclusive way, I think if I ask the question, do you consider yourself a resident of the Chesapeake Bay region, you'd get a very different response. A lot of people don't know what a watershed is. They don't recognize that they live in one, et cetera. So these are watershed residents, even if they don't think they are. But yet, even if they don't know if they're a watershed resident or not, some 50% of them suggested that they spend at least a few days a year at or near the Chesapeake Bay. We asked them where you get your news, and this is the information that they came back to us with. So if you're thinking about how to encourage public engagement or reach folks, these are the places you might want to think about. Television shows and documentaries at the top. Facebook second, YouTube. YouTube is, I think, is still true that it's the second most used search engine, even though most of us don't view it as a search engine in the world anyway. Okay, so not only, I don't like to think about these being general public. So what you see in front of you is kind of it's really my interpretation and Chesapeake Bay Foundation's interpretation of who we think the key segments of the general public are at this point. I did the same research 5 years ago with Ipsos, and we used their sophisticated modeling to try to come up with what we thought were buckets of demographics of folks. And these are the terms we came up with. They're not external terms. I totally made them up. For instance, next gen eco idealists, you won't find that in Wikipedia anywhere. But that was the best way that we could come up with trying to describe what it sounds like, the next generation of environmental advocates. By and large, these are younger, more suburban, more diverse in nature, more likely to volunteer than make a donation, that kind of thing. And so there's a whole wheel of what these folks look like. And if you can squint and see the smaller percentages, This is the breakdown when you applied that model across the demographics of the respondents of our survey for both in the darker black is for 2025 or 2024 when we did it in October, November, and the smaller is in the light gray is what it looked like in 2019. And back when I did this 5 years ago, I thought, the next generation of eco-idealists, next generation of advocates is coming. We know that the largest transfer of wealth is going to happen, and that the expectations of the next generation are very different than our current what we call traditional eco advocates. And you can see that shift has happened over the last 5 years. In 2019, 27% of the general public qualified for what we consider to be our traditional eco advocate. Now it's 20%. Next gen eco idealist was 18% in 2019. Now it's 23%. So we're seeing that shift. And I know there's a lot of information here, and you probably have questions like, what does it mean to be ambivalent and disengaged? And if you want to reach out to me separately, I'll happy to explain that. But I'm gonna keep charging ahead. But basically, I'm using these key segments and everything from our marketing for fundraising to working with our policy and outreach staff to try to figure out what the expectations of these groups are and how we can get them engaged in advocacy, whether it's signing a petition or coming out to testify or volunteering an event or any of those sorts of things. Of course, those groups have very different expectations. I previously showed you where people get, general public get their news, but if you drill down in these segmentations, you see a very different story. And so, for instance, the next gen eco idealists have, they're still using Twitter, or they're still more social media than books or television documentaries, which we all know this generally, but it's kind of interesting to see it broken down this way. So what do they actually care about? So one of the things we were trying to do was look at, what do they care about, and how do we think about the issues we're working on in either ways that they, things that concern them, or where do our issues stack up with them? So what you're seeing in front of you now was basically Ipsos does an online or ongoing global question, and basically any one of their surveys they've called "What Worries the World?" Battery of questions, and these are the responses to that. Dark green being the U.S., the lighter aqua being what the watershed residents we polled responded. And I think it's kind of interesting to see that inflation, crime, immigration control, healthcare, et cetera, are in the top five there. Climate change, if you think about when this was done, October, November, presidential elections happening, the environment and the climate change were not part of the narrative that any candidate was talking about. So that it falls below the cut. But, we certainly heard about inflation, crime, immigration control. A corollary causation, I don't know. Those of you that are statisticians or sociologists might have a better idea about which leads which. But, I think it's kind of interesting to see in this one anyway, that threats against the environment, watershed residents have almost twice the response there than United States population. When asked specifically about what environmental issues they think need to be addressed, climate change topped the list. Water quality came second. And you can see further down, things like agriculture and stormwater runoff and overfishing fall a little lower. Now, I think some of that, there's certainly very broad takeaways from this, but there's also kind of phraseology that may have influenced this. Most people, as from a communication standpoint, I recommend that we don't talk about stormwater runoff because people don't understand it. But if you talk about, motor oil dripping out of a car on a road, that's more understandable. And so perhaps if we phrase the questions in that way, you might see a little bit of different response. But I still think it's kind of interesting to see that climate change, water quality, and air quality, toxic pollution, plastic waste top the list. Toxics and plastics are interesting, especially when you look at when asked specifically about issues negatively affecting the Chesapeake Bay watershed and not just the environment at large. There we see plastics and toxics top the list as amongst the top 5 issues negatively affecting the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This is not surprising to me either. In previous research we've done, we always see plastic and toxics come much further up. Of course, that's probably it's the pollution that people see in their backyard. It's the most tangible. Every year there's bills that are put forward to try to eliminate plastic bags or this, that, and the other. Often they fail, but it's not without merit. It's what the public expect. It's an issue that we see. It's something they want tackled. Okay, so when asked, do you believe that how concerned do you think that we as society are about the environment more as compared to 10 years ago? 67% say that we as a society are more concerned about the environment than we were 10 years ago. And then the right shows what are the top 5 reasons for the increased environmental concern. Climate change tops the list there, better understanding of science, need for environmental conservation, et cetera. This is interesting, but I can tell you that when we asked the same sort of question 10 years or 5 years ago, the response was largely the same. So we're not seeing any shift in ideology or perception about where we're moving and for the environment. But I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Who do they think should be addressing these challenges? This is kind of interesting. So when asked who do you think should be addressing environmental issues, environmental nonprofits tops the list, and then you see a battery of government agencies, state and local elected officials, further down institutions, news media, business leaders. You know, it is what it is. I think it's kind of interesting. I think this speaks to an expectation of a comprehensive and collaborative approach to addressing environmental issues, I think. We also asked people, how would you rate the performance of these various groups or entities in terms of actually addressing the environmental issues? And this is what you see when you get that. So there's quite a fall off between expectations of action and actual performance. And in fact, you see a flip flop of some of the ordering here, where academic institutions moves up the list quite a ways, and state and local elected officials and business leaders are down near the bottom. We asked folks, who do you trust to speak most candidly about the issues affecting the environment overall? It's the darker green, and then the Chesapeake Bay watershed specifically is on the right. And this is what you get. I think it's kind of interesting, at least anecdotally anyway, that academic institutions has quite a bit difference in the Chesapeake Bay watershed versus the environment overall. I would like to attribute that to the very strong academic institutions we have in the watershed working on issues, whether it's VIMS or UMSIs or Penn State or whomever. But I think you can think about I mean, trust is could be a whole nother topic of conversation if this group hasn't considered that. But the level of distrust has certainly grown, and I think the data show that, but not here, but in general. But if you're an elected official or you're a business leader, this might help you think about who you want to stand with when you're trying to solicit public participation or build your own trust. Another pop quiz. What bay critter did people think most deserves to be protected? You can feel free to put it in the chat. Blue crab, I see. Horseshoe crab. I like horseshoes. Sturgeons, osprey, oysters. Menhaden. There you go, Lisa Renee. All right. This is what you get when you look at general public. It's blue crab tops the list. Bald eagle was second. Oysters was third. Striped bass. Menhaden. I did throw menhaden in the options for people to respond to. I was kind of wondering what would happen there if we'd come up with a poll that would suggest that the general public feel like a lot more needs to be done to protect menhaden than what's perhaps happening in Virginia right now anyway. It is higher. The response is higher than 12% amongst Virginians, but not incredibly so. I think it's around 15%. One point to consider here too is that remember, all this polling is what people say they would do. It isn't necessarily reflective of what they'll actually do. I can tell you from experience that when we run fundraising campaigns and A/B test, donate to support blue crabs versus donate to restore oysters wins all day long. And does that mean that people expect that more to be done for oysters than blue crabs? I don't know. So how do the general public think we're doing? This is when asked about, do you think environmental policy is moving in the right or wrong direction, at the federal level, state level, and regarding the Chesapeake Bay, you get a little different story. About 60% of people think environmental policy in the United States is moving in the wrong direction versus 60% in the watershed think environmental policy is moving in the right direction. So I'd like to think that means that we are doing something right, but I don't know. I don't know how to interpret this. These three bars, it's a lot on screen, we ask people, basically, what's your perception of the health of the Chesapeake Bay? Is it better than it was 10 years ago? And do you think restoration efforts are more or less of a priority than they were 10 years ago? What about 37% people think that the current state of the Bay health is good, 43% neither good nor poor, only 20% think it's poor. There's probably a little more data in here that you can sit with. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so I'm going to keep charging on. But again, if you have more questions about this or want to talk more about it, I can find a time to talk to you. This is kind of an interesting one. We asked people about their familiarity with the 2025 Chesapeake Bay watershed health commitments, which I'm sure many of you on the call work on. And I think it's kind of interesting that it's somewhere around less than 40% of people are even familiar that there are 2025 watershed commitments. And of those folks, it seems like most think that we're either going to fully or somewhat achieve those commitments. I think that there's a lot of hand wringing that's spent and a lot of time spent over worrying about this 2025 date. And generally, in other places of the survey, I could tell you that the public, one of the top expectations of environmental nonprofits and our colleagues is that we have a plan. So they want you to have a plan, but at the end of the day, they don't really know what the plan is, and most times people think it's being achieved. So I would suggest that we stop hand wringing so much on 2025 and get to work or keep working on the next plan, which I know many of you are as well. Another pop quiz: what percentage of residents believe saving the Bay also addresses climate change? Is something that we come up against all the time. There's perception that I don't want to support Chesapeake Bay Foundation or work on Bay restoration issues because climate change is the most imminent challenge of our generation and whatever. And obviously all of us would probably say, well, yeah, it's one and the same. I mean, what we're doing to save the Bay is also working to mitigate climate change and back and forth. So if you want to venture a guess what the response was here, you can do that. 55, 70, 60, 30, 34. I would say when I'm asking people this question, most of our partners and colleagues are saying somewhere in the 30% range. The answer is actually 72% of those living in or near the watershed agree that efforts to save the Bay are also addressing climate change, which I take that as a sign of hope. I'm hopeful that people are recognizing what we're doing has mutual benefits, and that if you don't want to talk about climate change, you can talk about saving the Bay, and guess what? We're still achieving the goals that we all know need to be achieved. Just looking at the clock, I will stop there and yield my time to the floor.
Oh, thanks, Rob. It's just fascinating. I'm going to start on Rachel. You want to turn on your camera, and I'll again remind the people that are here that I've got a list of questions that were submitted in advance, but I love taking questions that you put in the chat after you've heard the presentations. So at any rate, the first question I have is, and I'd love to hear this from both of your perspectives, because you're both working for things that have a common goal, but from totally different organizational types. What are some of the barriers you've encountered in bringing public participation into your work? I mean, if it's obviously got a lot of key benefits. I know it's difficult to do, but it seems to be worth the investment. So what are some of the barriers you've encountered? And Rachel, maybe you want to answer that first, and then we'll go to Rob.
Sure. So there are definitely a lot of the barriers also kind of overlap with some of the cons that I mentioned as well. It takes time, it takes money to do this work. And, for me personally, I have a very small team, so we can't necessarily go into every community and really get to know them and sit at every meeting. So that is a big factor right there. And I know to really make meaningful change that you need to have a lot of, there needs to be support in making that happen. And a lot of times different projects can be rushed. And you need to really build in the time, you need to build in the effort to do a process like this, because oftentimes, it could take a year or more to really get into the public, to really get the answers you need to come back and thoughtfully make changes to certain information. And a lot of times that time is just not granted to you. So I think you try to do the best with what you have. And that's probably the biggest barrier I've encountered.
Let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. Does the Chesapeake Bay program assume that, or not assume, but does it kind of utilize the fact that it's such a large partnership to sort of satisfy some of that, what would be considered public participatory process? The fact that there's such a wide variety of people at the table?
I think yes, to a degree. I think we could probably do it better, but I do think that is the intention. And we do have a lot of great partners that are very engaged with different networks. I know, for instance, I will call out, I know we have some folks from Pennsylvania on here. They are great with their local governments. And so we know that's definitely somewhere to tap into. And then there's others probably that we need to strengthen. And that's something we're continually working on, I think.
How about you, Rob? What are the challenges?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, keep in mind that I come from a comms background, so I'm not doing grassroots outreach necessarily, other than online sort of advocacy and organizing. But aside from capacity and time, people's time, I think trying to make this stuff relatable from a communication standpoint, which is complex, wonky, science-based stuff, meaningful to someone in an everyday way, and help them understand how it affects them personally to move them to action is can be difficult and takes a lot of time. And I think the more that we can all do a better job at that, I think we'll see increased public participation, I would say.
Hmm. I have quick question to ask each of you. Rachel, Larry Sanford wants to know, was the first black and white picture intended to show public participation or insider deal making?
I mean, I put it there to show that the public's been engaged and different groups from the very beginning. What happened that day, I don't know. I think, not even a year old yet, so I can't answer that question, Larry. Sorry.
And Rob, I'm sure I'll just get this question out of the way because I think a lot of people are going to ask. Jeremy Hansen wants to know, is there or will there be a version, a report of the Ipsos survey results that people can find online and cite or reference?
Yeah, hey Jeremy, thanks for the question. Yes, I haven't quite figured that out yet, if I'm being perfectly honest. I intend to release some of this information, as I mentioned, in a couple of weeks to the media. There's other parts of it that are also compelling and media worthy that I just didn't have time to share today, and I'm afraid to leak out, honestly. But once I get it out publicly, I will endeavor to make as much of it as possible available to many of you. There's an Excel spreadsheet behind all this data, that's got 300 tabs on it and cross tabs, and I'm sure can be applicable to many of your roles. And at some point soon, hopefully, I will post that, I guess, somewhere on our website for you all to access.
Hmm. Thank you. I think this question, given the past month, is a really, really good one. It was submitted in advance. Do you have strategies to maintain trust in communities during changing administrations and changing norms? And so, Rob, I'll let you take this one first.
Sorry, what was the question one more time? I was giving a thumbs up to Jeremy in the chat.
Oh, okay. Um, are there any strategies, or what are strategies to maintain trust in communities during changing administrations and changing norms, as it applies to, the issues and messaging under your purview?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I generally speaking, I think from a communication standpoint, transparency and authenticity is paramount to trust, and I think um, that's where I focus a lot of my time, is trying to make sure that people know what's going on, and that they're being given as much of the data and information as we can possibly give them. I don't know if that really answers your question fully, but I think trust is built on transparency and whether people value, feel they can believe you, believability.
Hmm. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, I can basically agree with everything Rob just said as well. And, I think it's about uh, continuity as well, that we're out there, we're still continuing to do the same work we're doing, and, showing the public and all of our audiences that we are still there. We're still showing our value, showing that we're doing the great work that we always do. And I think that gives folks reassurance as well.
Hmm. Great answer. Um, Let me move to, because there were quite a few questions actually about burnout. So in restoration work, are there best practices before, during, and after the process to minimize community fatigue or burnout? And I'll let Rachel, you go first, and then have Rob follow up, because you're both working to represent you know, longstanding organizations that have been doing this for a long time. So,
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know if I have a great question for that. Because you're thinking more kind of burnout on the part of the community, or burnout, meaning so many people coming in.
well, I know you could burn out, but what about
Yeah, I have.
community fatigue, right?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think through some things that I had heard in the past. And I know there are some communities that are continually targeted for different restoration activities, different programs and projects. I think it says a lot to kind of going back to involving the community in what you're doing, to really have them at the table to be part of the process. And I want to reference, there's an amazing work that's being done right now in Crisfield on the Eastern Shore that's being run mainly by the Nature Conservancy. And I know one reason this has been so successful is because they were there from the very beginning with the community at the same table saying, all right, we're going to work on this together. So I think it was kind of a division of labors. It was, knowing that your opinions are being counted for right from the start. Then other projects where I've heard, folks just come in, they're like, hey, we're going to do this, you'll love it. And then they leave and the community's kind of like, wait, what happened? So, given that kind of viewpoint, I think being able to really kind of have all that understanding and trust up front and early is kind of the best way to avoid kind of that burnout and continuously pummeling different communities from the start.
Mm, thank you. How about Rob?
Gosh, I'm going to pull on not my communications or even my CBF work necessarily to maybe try to answer this. I led a community-wide restoration effort in my neighborhood, and I knew going into that it would be challenging to try to keep people engaged. And a couple things that I did along the way was to ensure that there were multiple and ongoing opportunities for people to contribute, even if it was just listening sessions and just to provide opportunity to hear what people had to say. People just want to feel heard, and so providing those opportunities to feel heard, I think were important in that, and then trying to celebrate successes as shared successes along the way, and not just at the end. Really, I think were helpful in trying to keep people continually engaged. Again, people want to be part of something successful, and when you can make them part of that success, that's always helpful.
Mm. Larry Sanford's got a great question, I think, and especially in the context, Rob, of the survey results that you presented in terms of knowledge about the watershed agreement and that sort of series of things you said, like in your experience, um, people want to know you have a plan. They don't necessarily know what's in the plan, and they kind of assume you're meeting it. So Larry's asking, given the time constraints, what is the best approach to seek public participation in the watershed agreement revisions?
Thanks, Larry. Um, so this is definitely, I will be honest, this is goes against everything I just said about having the public participate is in kind of what we're doing here for revising the watershed agreement. There is just not enough time to, I think, do a really thoughtful approach to integrating the public in what we're doing. So we're trying to do the best we can to get them involved with the time we do have. So I know I have been working on a pretty big communications and outreach strategy that's just about finished. That's kind of looking to see how can we work within the existing networks. And my team has already been reaching out to different organizations to have meetings to work on this, to see how can we utilize what they have in place to kind of share the information and the process of what's going on right now as far as revising the agreement. So when it is open for public feedback this summer, that they can thoughtfully send us the feedback that hopefully can be implemented and really reflect what's important out there to the folks that live and work here in the watershed. So that's kind of the big way we're doing that. Just coming out from my team, we're planning different, webinars to hopefully market out. We are planning blogs. We are planning ways to get information out there about how this time is going to be open. But we're also going to be creating sort of just a blanket template that we can provide to other partners so they can go out and send what information they're collecting back to us ahead of time. So that's something we can try to integrate in the different work that we're doing to get it out there. But we're always open to more suggestions and thoughts and opportunities, but that's kind of our general plan for the time being.
So it sounds as if while we'd all love to aspire to collaborative, you're trying to move at least past informational to consultative, right? To use the
I
language.
am hoping to, yes, yeah. Trying my
Yeah.
best.
Rob, from your platform and sort of being the largest organization that's really committed solely to the Bay, what would you have liked to see or would like to see in engaging the public actually in the revisions to the watershed agreement? Because it's very difficult, right? It's a multi-objective, complex agreement. And I think some of your survey results point to people being interested in a pretty holistic view of it, right? It's not just water quality. They seem to be engaged in a lot of other things. Like I'm surprised by the toxics.
Yeah. And some of the other data that I wasn't able to share today too, we asked people what restorative actions do you think are necessary to take to achieve our goals, and essentially we gave them you know the 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 outline of the Chesapeake Bay agreement, watershed agreement, and said, how would you rank these things as a level of importance? And at the end of the day, it basically the data suggests that from top to bottom, from toxics to public access, there's a relatively high expectation that all those things um, are are on the table, and so a comprehensive approach is necessary that includes things like environmental education or toxics. Um, uh, and then we also asked people how should we be measuring success, and it wasn't just water quality that came up as a response. It was inclusive of living resource response and habitat successes. So as we craft the next Bay Agreement, I think there's an expectation from the public that there remains a comprehensive agreement remains to be in place, and that it not be solely focused on water quality. That you can have the best. Denise will tell you that you can have the best water quality out there, and if it's not in the right spot or of the right conditions, you won't have grasses and oysters and things that like truly would mean a functioning ecosystem and what I would think of as a saved bay. Um, I can't really speak on behalf of CBF like in terms of a policy or standpoint, how we think the process could be improved or whatever. Yeah, I recognize this is me speaking. I recognize it's a very tight timeline and that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and to do a truly comprehensive public input would be difficult. So, maybe I might offer that the data that I have that suggests that is certainly a good sampling. And then perhaps, again, to my point about not thinking about the public writ large, but think about key segments, try to identify who really are the key stakeholders and representative of those groups, and you go through that consultative process with them in the short timeline that you have. And
Mm.
I don't know what that looks like. I don't know. I can't. It's hard for me to keep up with the machinations of every Git and every group and everything. That's not my wheelhouse. But and how you would actually do that through that whole process. But I would suggest sampling and consultative process would probably be the way to do it.
Yeah, I think it actually speaks to maybe some of those networks, Rachel, that you were referring to is actually the NGOs like CBF and to try and I don't know extend the biggest reach you can in the time you have.
And we'll certainly take part in, trying to encourage public participation in any public comment period. And that's definitely something that CBF will do, and my team will work on.
Let me move to some questions about impact we've got. So, I was struck by the survey results of how many different communication channels, you're trying to cover and take care of. And so, um, can you talk about, some of the more examples of the most effective vehicles that you've used to connect with maybe a group of people that you really want action from? Like, does it really have to be that targeted? And what have been some of the most effective messages about bay restoration to elicit engagement? Um,
So
Rachel,
Yeah,
I,
you
go ahead,
you both
Rachel.
got your mics off, so go for it.
yeah, so as I say, in my 2 cents, again, it depends on the audience you're wanting to reach. So for us, increasingly, it's social media. And even that evolves over the years. So, where Facebook once was incredibly popular, now it's all more short form videos. So my team has really translated over to YouTube, to Instagram Reels, things like that, because that is how people are mainly consuming information. But then there's a lot of folks that maybe are not even on social media yet. So, depending on the demographic, it might be going to community meetings. It might still be writing articles that appear in the newspaper. So again, it really you have to figure out first who you're trying to reach and then find the appropriate channel in which to do so. So that's probably, I would say, but for us, social media is probably the best way at the moment for us to reach different groups. As far as messaging, I've always found that what always resonates the most is when you can tell somebody how work or an issue or something is going to directly impact them, putting it in terms they understand. And oftentimes, if you can equate it back to a community or an economic issue, that resonates more. People always have kind of, I find the opinion like, well, this is happening, like climate change is happening, but it's not happening to me. But if you're able to say, well, that creek that's in your backyard is going to overflow because of all this extreme rain we're getting. And it's going to cost you X amount of money to fix, and it's going to happen several different times. And that type of targeted communication is really difficult because, again, there's so many people in this watershed, but kind of being able to isolate it down to a state, a county, even to that level is going to give you much more bang for your buck as far as getting the message out there.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's um, there's no magic bullet anymore, and if there ever was, and it's so dependent on the issue. I mean, I could give you examples of, at least from where I sit, if we're trying to encourage public comment on I don't know, a fisheries policy that Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is considering or something. One of the most effective, I mean, it's, aside from like our email file and general social media, more and more we're employing paid advertising. And some of the more effective places that's happening are in surprising places. It's like Bing and search engine. Response.
Mm.
It's not on content platforms necessarily. If you're looking at success of or cost per transaction or cost per lead or cost per acquisition, so how much money it costs me to buy an ad that then converts to a person making a public comment. Paid advertising is just we have to do more and more of it. That's the way that social media and any digital media is moving. I mean, the people running those platforms know full well that, I mean, they're just trying to monetize everything. So you're not going to get a whole lot of reach from organic anymore, and
Mhm.
you just have to pay to play. If you're
Yeah.
talking about like base saving writ large, general public, look, the number one question that I always get, or colleagues get, that CBF gets, is just how's the Bay doing? And so basic communications devices like our State of the Bay report or a State of the Bay report or UMSI's State of the Bay, Bay report, um, those answer those high level questions, and then, pushing those through your traditional channels, um, helps get that out there, whether it's, local television or, working with traditional media. The other end of that would be like, we're talking about public participation. It feels like primarily through an advocacy and policy making lens. But if you're talking about, behavioral change or participation, if you want people to participate in your oyster gardening or oyster growing efforts, um, local television is actually one of the platforms I think is successful in trying to get people engaged there. Morning news, local morning news is can be highly effective. And then if you're talking about trusted messengers, Pew Research always shows that local meteorologists top the list in terms of people whom people trust. And so I'm kind of like, let's try to partner with local meteorologists on local television and see if we can talk about things like voice restoration.
I
And
just,
Denise, I'll add really quickly too that making the message simplistic, that's something that really resonates more and more and more. Where I think, and Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, they recommend like not ever doing anything above an eighth grade reading level, which can get really hard with different really complex science and technical messages, but that's just something to continue to be cognizant about.
yeah. And I often think it's the oddest communication channels. I'll just as an aside, one of the most effective messaging places at Penn State, if you wanted to tell the students about something, was something called stall stories, which were, messages on the back of the bathroom stall doors.
That
So,
is actually, that is my number one way I always said to spread communication, because I used to work in internal comms only, was to put a flyer on the back of a bathroom stall. People are going to read it.
there's lots of comments about a very insightful conversation, and I thank you too. And I'm going to allow you to use just the last couple of minutes to, if you'd like to leave us with, a parting thought that you'd like us to hold out of the conversation. And I'll ask Rob first.
Well, Denise, thanks so much for having us, and it was a pleasure being alongside Rachel and spending some lunchtime with you all. Um, I guess just one other thought I've had about all this is, and I talked to my team about this too, is that all of us, especially researchers and scientists that are involved in this conversation, these ongoing conversations, we've been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and our narrative just keeps going forward and forward and forward, and we're leaving so many people behind, but not trying to go back to basics and talk about like the simple facts of these things and like what it means to people and their dinner plates and their wallets and basic facts that they didn't grow up. A lot of people didn't grow up on the Bay, so they don't understand these things, and so we have to remind ourselves over and over again, I think, um, to set aside the acronyms and always go back to the start with people and try to explain the basics. So if you want a theme, just always be thinking about going back to basics, BAYSICS.
Wow. Thank you. Rachel.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I would just also just remember folks to, involve your communications folks early and often, because we could really help you shape the narrative, shape, who needs to be involved, how they can help. But if it's kind of an afterthought once something's done, it's really hard to go back then and convince, things to be changed or whatnot, sort of with the whole process that I mentioned, early and often for everything is always a better strategy. So, and thank you, Denise, for bringing this again into the conversation because it's important and doesn't get spoken about a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks to you both for so much context, so much framework and language around the topic, and I really, really appreciate it. It's one of my favorite webinars today's is. So thank you. Thank you everyone for submitting wonderful questions, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.